The Okavango Delta was dying. What had once been one of Africa's most vibrant ecosystems, a living mosaic of winding rivers, emerald floodplains, and forests teeming with life, had withered into a landscape of cracked clay and sun-bleached bones. The worst drought in living memory had turned the delta into a silent wasteland. Ancient waterways shrank to shallow puddles, then disappeared altogether. Birds abandoned their nests, elephants marched for miles in desperate search of water, and predators fought brutally over territories that no longer held enough prey to sustain them. And moving through this scorched, hollow world was Asha, an 8-year-old lioness who had once been a queen. For years, Asha had ruled over a pride of 12 lions. She had been the heart of her family, a steady leader, a fierce hunter, a devoted mother. Under her guidance, her cubs had grown strong, her daughters had raised litters of their own, and her territory had thrived with rivers, shade, and plentiful food. But drought is a thief, and it stole everything from her. As water disappeared, prides across the delta collided in violent, desperate clashes. Boundaries dissolved. Hunger replaced caution. And one afternoon, Asha's world was torn apart when a coalition of younger, stronger males swept down from the north. The fight was merciless. Asha watched as her mate fell first, then her grown daughters, then her grand cubs, all in a single catastrophic battle she had no power to stop. She fought until her body burned with exhaustion, until her claws were slick with blood and dust. But in the end, she survived only because the attackers deemed her no longer a threat. They wanted her territory, not her corpse. The sun set that day on a world Asha no longer recognized. Now she wandered alone, a ghost moving through the ruins of what had once been her kingdom. Her golden coat, once sleek and vibrant, hung dull beneath the layers of dust. Her shoulders sagged beneath a weight heavier than hunger. The grief inside her was so profound, it seemed to radiate from her bones. Everywhere she went, memories followed. The watering hole where her cubs had taken their first wobbly steps, the shady grove where her pride had napped in tangled piles of warm fur, the grassy ridge where the young ones used to wrestle while she kept watch. All of it empty now, all of it lost. From afar, her story was being recorded, not by lions, but by humans. Dr. Beverly Okani, a respected wildlife filmmaker who had spent over 2 decades documenting lions in the Delta, had fitted Asha with a GPS collar. Beverly knew the moment Asha's pride was destroyed, and she watched with a heavy heart as the lioness's movements became erratic and aimless. Each new data point painted a deeper, more painful picture. A mother with no family left, roaming miles on end with no clear direction. Her nightly roars growing weaker each day. Beverly had studied countless lionesses, mothers who lost cubs, females exiled from their prides. But Asha's decline was different, more severe, more desperate. Lions are deeply social creatures. To lose a pride is to lose identity, purpose, and reason. And for a solitary lioness, loneliness is often a slow death sentence. On a blistering morning when the temperature soared past 104 degrees, 40 degrees Celsius, Asha dragged herself toward a part of the delta she had never explored before. She wasn't searching for territory. She wasn't hunting. She wasn't even truly thinking. She was just looking for water. The only thing she still had the strength to care about. Towering above the barren landscape were ancient baobab trees, their massive trunks rising like sentinels from another time. It was beneath one of these giants that Asha first heard the sound. At first, She dismissed it as the wind brushing through dry leaves, but then it came again. A faint, trembling cry. The sound of something very small and very afraid. Asha paused, head raised, ears focused. It wasn't a lion cub. It wasn't a predator. It wasn't even a species she could recognize right away. But it was the sound of a baby in distress, and for a mother who had lost everything, that mattered more than instinct. She stepped closer, and there, curled beneath the roots of the ancient baobab, she saw him, a baby elephant, no more than a few weeks old, his gray skin shrunken and loose from severe dehydration, his tiny trunk trembling as he tried to call out for a mother who would never arrive. He weighed around 130 pounds, too small for his kind, but still larger than any prey a lone lioness would normally dare to challenge. Yet the moment their eyes met, something inside Asha shifted. This should have been food. Instead, it became fate. The tiny elephant calf didn't move when Asha approached. He didn't try to flee, didn't trumpet in fear, didn't collapse into panic the way most prey animals would when a lioness stands over them. Instead, with heartbreaking innocence, he lifted his small, trembling trunk toward her. It was the universal elephant gesture of greeting, a hopeful, vulnerable attempt to connect with anyone who might protect him, even a predator. Asha froze. Her instincts screamed the truth. This calf was alone. He was dehydrated, weak, and defenseless, and in the brutal logic of the savannah, he was a perfect meal. But Asha didn't feel hunger. She felt something far older, far deeper, a memory, a wound, a longing for the cubs she could no longer groom, no longer nuzzle, no longer protect. The calf's dark eyes searched hers with complete trust, and in that instant, something inside her cracked open. Not pain, but purpose. A purpose she thought had died the day her pride fell. Slowly, astonishingly, Asha lowered her head and sniffed the calf's dusty skin. He responded with a soft rumble, so faint it was almost a whisper. It wasn't a plea for help. It was acceptance. And Asha, without meaning to, accepted him in return. She nudged him gently. He leaned into her. She groomed the dust from his face with the same rough, motherly strokes she had once used on her newborn cubs. Against millions of years of evolved behavior, a lioness and a baby elephant forged a fragile, impossible bond. But if Asha was going to save him, she had to make a choice. One that defied every law of predator and prey. Asha never named her cubs. Lions don't name their young. But this was different. The calf felt like a promise, a second chance, a miracle hidden beneath a tree older than time. So she named him Kumo, the promise of rain in the local Tswana language, a name filled with hope for two lives on the brink. But hope alone wouldn't keep him alive. Kumo's skin sagged loosely along his ribs, a textbook sign of severe dehydration. His movements were slow, clumsy, almost dreamlike. His cries were fading, each weaker than the last. He needed water within hours, and the nearest source Asha knew of was nearly 2 miles away. Alone, she could reach it in under an hour. But with Kumo? She wasn't sure he could even walk that far. Asha paced around him, thinking, really thinking, in a way few humans ever attribute to predators. She assessed his strength, the path ahead, the heat rising from the cracked earth. The challenge was nearly impossible, but she had faced impossible before, so she tried. Asha nudged Kumo's side with her head, encouraging him to rise. The calf wobbled, legs trembling, and collapsed again. She circled him, nudged him once more. Finally, with a soft cry, he managed to stand. Asha positioned herself beside him, close enough for him to lean against, far enough not to knock him over, and together they began the slow crawl toward life. What should have been a 30-minute walk stretched into a grueling 4-hour ordeal. The heat punished them relentlessly. Kumo stumbled often. Each time Asha stepped over him to block the sun, licking his head until he found the strength to rise again. She was no longer a predator. She was a mother again. A desperate, determined mother. Dr. Rebecca Lala had been surveying water sources that day, scanning the horizon through her binoculars when something caught her eye. At first, she assumed the lioness was stalking a weakened calf, a tragic but ordinary sight in a drought year. But as she watched, confusion crept in, then disbelief, then awe. The lioness wasn't hunting. She was guiding, protecting, loving. Rebecca watched for over an hour, barely blinking, documenting every gesture, every moment. It was the kind of footage that rewrites textbooks, not just scientific papers. By the time Asha and Kumo reached the muddy pool, the sun was sinking low. Kumo staggered into the water and drank with frantic urgency. Asha stood guard beside him, scanning the empty plains with the fierce intensity of a mother defending her young. Kumo lived that day because Asha made a choice that contradicted every instinct her species had ever known. And as dusk settled, and Kumo leaned his small body against hers, Asha accepted the truth. She had saved his life. But in a way she could not yet understand, he had saved hers too. In the 3 months that followed, the delta remained harsh and unforgiving, but something extraordinary was unfolding in its scorched heart. Against every instinct written in her DNA, Asha had become a mother again, not to a lion cub, but to a creature who should have been her mortal enemy. And little by little, Kumo began to thrive. The once weak elephant calf grew stronger with each passing week. His legs steadied, his cries became louder, his curiosity blossomed like a flower in the desert. And his bond with Asha deepened into something so natural, so seamless, that the line between predator and prey blurred into a relationship nature had never scripted. Every mother and child developed their own secret language, and Asha and Kumo were no different. Asha learned the meaning of Kumo's soft rumbles, his high-pitched cries, the way his trunk curled when he was scared, the stomp of his foot when he wanted attention. And Kumo learned Asha's world, the warning growl too low for most animals to hear, the firm nudge that meant stay close, the brush of her whiskers against his cheek that meant you're safe. No scientist had ever witnessed a cross-species bond this intricate, not between predator and prey, and certainly not between two species as different as lions and elephants. Dr. Rebecca Lala set up hidden cameras across the area to record everything. What they captured would later stun the scientific community. Asha, who had spent her entire life protecting and training lion cubs, began teaching Kumo the basics of survival. Even though elephants traditionally learn from herds, not lone guardians. One afternoon, Rebecca recorded a moment that would later appear in wildlife documentaries across the world. Asha rolling around in a patch of mud, coating herself from head to tail. She then nudged Kumo toward the mud, demonstrating over and over until the calf finally understood. Kumo joyfully plopped into the mud, flinging it everywhere with his tiny trunk. He had learned the elephant's most essential cooling ritual, from a lioness. On other days, Asha guided him to safe feeding grounds, using her keen nose to find plants and water sources. She didn't eat grass or foliage, but she knew where shade lingered, where danger lurked, where the land still held life. She never let him wander more than a few feet from her side. At night, Kumo slept pressed against her chest, his trunk draped across her shoulder like a child holding onto a favorite blanket. Asha would groom his face, lick the dust from his ears, and purr in deep, comforting tones that reverberated through the earth beneath them. In those quiet moments, anyone watching could see it clearly. They were a family. But the Delta was not a place that welcomed miracles without challenge. As Kumo grew, he began showing more of his natural elephant behavior, like pushing trees, knocking branches down, or stomping on shrubs just to hear the crunch. One morning, his playful shove sent a dead tree crashing to the ground. The thunderous sound instantly triggered Asha's defensive instincts. Her muscles tensed, ears flattened, claws extended. To her, the crash meant danger, predators, rival lions, or even hunters. For a moment, the two stood frozen. Kumo stared at her, confused and hurt. Asha stared back, unsure how to respond to behavior that was so alien to her own species. Then Kumo did something that melted every barrier between them. He stepped forward, lowered his head, and gently touched her cheek with his trunk in an unmistakable gesture of apology. Asha's posture softened. She leaned forward and groomed him tenderly, reaffirming their bond. Even science couldn't explain it, but anyone watching would understand. Love, real love, adapts. Rebecca watched hours upon hours of footage. The more she observed, the more impossible the story became. A lioness teaching an elephant mud-bathing, an elephant mimicking lion body language. Two species evolving a shared vocabulary without a single shared ancestor. Researchers debated whether this was instinct, trauma, or something more profound. By the end of the third month, one conclusion became undeniable. Asha and Kumo had formed the most unlikely family the Delta had ever known, and the world was about to learn their story. Because soon, the greatest challenge of their lives would arrive from across the plains. A challenge with golden fur, sharp claws, and hungry eyes. The dry season tightened its grip on the Delta like a closing fist. Waterholes shrank to muddy ponds. Trees dropped their last shriveled leaves. Every living creature grew desperate, and desperation always draws predators. Asha sensed them long before they appeared. The faint trace of unfamiliar musk on the wind. The distant rumble of paws against hardened earth. The shifting tension in the air that only a seasoned lioness could detect. A new pride was approaching, a big one. 3 full-grown males, heavy-bodied and battle-scarred. 5 females. 4 adolescent cubs learning how to hunt. A force powerful enough to claim any territory they wanted. A force that would not hesitate to kill a lone lioness or a helpless young elephant. At dawn, the approaching pride appeared on the horizon, moving with a confidence only hunger can sharpen. Their target was the same waterhole where Asha and Kumo rested, a patch of muddy water the entire region depended on. Asha could run. She could hide in the thickets. She could save herself. But she didn't even glance at the escape routes. Instead, she stepped in front of Kumo, placing her body between him and the approaching danger. Her message was unmistakable. They would face her before they ever touched him. Kumo, still only a few months old, didn't retreat behind her. Instead, he pressed against her flank, trembling but loyal. His tiny trunk curled protectively around her neck as he emitted a low, terrified rumble, the only sound he knew to express fear and defiance at the same time. The Liad male spotted them first. He stopped abruptly, his mane catching the morning light, his golden eyes narrowing in confusion. Behind him, the lionesses froze. They had hunted elephant calves before, but never like this. Predator and prey were standing together, not as enemies, but as a united front. The sight broke every rule of the savanna. The lead male let out a booming roar meant to intimidate rivals and assert dominance. The sound rolled across the plains like distant thunder. Birds scattered, antelopes fled. Kumo didn't run. Instead, he answered with a deep, resonant rumble so powerful that the ground beneath his feet vibrated. It was a sound no elephant calf should be able to make. A sound born not from age or strength, but from the will to protect the one who had protected him. The pride hesitated. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Lions read body language with astounding accuracy, and nothing about Asha resembled a predator claiming prey. Her tail was low, her body steady, her stance unmistakable. She wasn't hunting. She was guarding. The lionesses recognized that look. They had worn it themselves over their own cubs. For more than an hour, the two sides watched each other under the rising sun. Asha growled softly, warning but not challenging. Kumo stayed tall, rumbling in sync with her breath. The pride circled, unsure whether to attack, retreat, or simply observe. The standoff became a silent negotiation, instinct battling with curiosity, hunger battling with respect. Finally, after endless minutes, the lead male made his decision. He broke eye contact first. Then, with a low grunt, he led his pride to the opposite side of the waterhole. They drank cautiously, never turning their backs fully on the strange pair, but neither did they advance. Asha and Kumo had won a battle no one thought possible. They had intimidated a full pride without lifting a claw. Not with violence, not with aggression, but with unity. Once the pride moved on, Kumo sagged with exhaustion. Asha pressed her forehead against his in a gesture lions reserve for the closest family bonds. Kumo curled his trunk around her ear, breathing shakily. For the first time, they had faced the world together as equals. Not mother and infant, not predator and prey. Partners. Dr. Rebecca Lala, watching through her telephoto lens from a distant hideout, could hardly believe what she'd witnessed. In all her years of field work, she had never seen anything like it. Experts would later analyze the footage again and again, trying to understand what had happened that morning. But the explanation was simple. Asha and Kumo weren't defying nature. They were rewriting it, and their journey was only just beginning. Because the closer Kumo grew toward adolescence, the more nature would demand answers. Was he lion? Was he elephant? Or had Asha created something entirely new? As the months slipped into a full year, the bond between Asha and Kumo grew stronger, deeper, and more complex than anything the Delta had witnessed. Kumo was no longer the fragile calf who could barely stand without her support. He had grown into a sturdy young elephant, nearly a meter tall at the shoulder and well over 200 pounds. His steps were firmer, his curiosity endless, and his presence impossible to overlook. Yet the most astonishing part wasn't his size. It was the way he moved, almost like a lion. Because Kumo had grown up watching Asha, learning her rhythms, her instincts, her silent language. Where typical elephant calves stumbled through the world with clumsy innocence, Kumo stepped lightly, placing each foot with deliberate precision. He tuned his ears to subtle sounds the way Asha did, lifting his head and freezing whenever she sensed something he could not yet understand. Asha had taught him to survive, but more importantly, she had taught him how to pay attention. In turn, Kumo transformed Asha's life in ways no lioness could ever anticipate. She hunted differently now, quicker pursuits, less wandering, always staying within sight of the young elephant. She adapted her day to his needs, finding shady resting spots, seeking out small patches of vegetation he could eat, and choosing paths easy enough for him to navigate. It wasn't just instinct guiding her anymore. It was devotion. Every morning they woke together. Every night they curled close beneath the stars. Kumo's trunk draped over her like an embrace. When Asha groomed him, cleaning dust from his eyes and ears, he rumbled with soft joy. When Kumo nudged her with his trunk, she answered with a gentle purr, deep and reassuring. To any outsider, it was unmistakable. They were a mother and son. Still, nature had its challenges. As Kumo grew, his elephant instincts began asserting themselves in unexpected ways. One afternoon, while Asha rested under the broad shade of a fever tree, Kumo discovered the thrill of pushing over dead wood. He leaned his shoulder into a brittle trunk, testing his strength. The tree creaked, shifted, and finally crashed to the ground in an explosion of dust and splinters. The sound hit Asha like a lightning bolt. She whipped around, dropping into a defensive crouch, ears flat, teeth bared. In her world, a sudden crash meant danger, an enemy pride, a predator ambush, the kind of threat that demanded instant violence. Kumo froze, wide-eyed, unsure why his playful act had triggered such fear. Slowly, he stepped toward her with a low rumble. He lowered his head until his trunk brushed against her cheek, a gesture of apology, uncertainty, and love. Asha's tension melted. She rose from her crouch and began grooming him, reassuring him with soft licks along his face. Moments like this revealed the fragile dance between their instincts. Kumo learned to be gentler when Asha was near. Asha learned not every loud sound meant danger. They were learning each other's worlds, step by step. By the time Kumo reached his first birthday, he had grown far too big for Asha to guide physically. She could no longer push him up with her body or shield him completely from harm. Instead, their relationship shifted toward trust and communication. Silent signals, careful movements, shared awareness. Kumo responded instantly to her cues. Asha responded instinctively to his. It was a partnership built on choice, not biology. The researchers observing them from a distance couldn't believe what they were seeing. Kumo moved with a mix of elephant gentleness and lion alertness. Asha displayed patience and adaptability no scientist had ever recorded in a big cat. Together, they operated like a single, unified family, an impossible one, but undeniably real. But the world around them was changing fast. The rains were returning, predators were returning, herds were returning. And as life flowed back into the delta, a question quietly grew in the background. When the world of elephants came calling, would Kumo stay with the lioness who raised him? 7 years passed, like chapters in a story no one believed nature would ever write. The Okavango Delta had healed, slowly but steadily. The rains returned, the rivers widened, and the landscape blossomed with the same wild beauty that once defined it. Herds migrated back, predators reclaimed territories, and the world felt alive again. Through it all, Asha and Kumo stayed together. Kumo had transformed into a magnificent young bull elephant, towering, powerful, and commanding. His tusks curved proudly from his face, not yet enormous but unmistakably strong. His sheer size cast a long shadow over the grasslands, but his heart, his temperament, his gentleness reflected the lioness who had raised him. Asha aged with grace. Gray encircled her muzzle, her strides slowed, and her once mighty muscles softened. Yet her eyes remained sharp, filled with the same fierce love that carried her through every impossible moment of their shared life. Though the world saw a lioness, Kumo saw something else entirely: his anchor, his memory, his mother. Their bond had grown beyond survival. They were companions, partners, the kind of family that defied every rule. But even the strongest bonds eventually face the pull of instinct. The first change came quietly. One evening, as the sky flushed orange and purple, Kumo suddenly stopped moving. He lifted his head high, spreading his ears wide. His trunk curled upward, tasting something carried on the wind. Asha recognized the stillness in his posture. It wasn't fear. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper. Far in the distance, the unmistakable rumble of a wild elephant herd vibrated across the plains. The calls were layered with meaning, warnings, greetings, directions, emotions only elephants could decode. Kumo stood frozen for almost an hour, eyes fixed on the horizon, listening to voices he had never known yet somehow recognized. Asha watched him silently. She didn't growl or call him back. She understood what was happening, even if it carved a quiet ache inside her chest. Over the following weeks, the calls grew more frequent. Each time, Kumo drifted toward the sound before Asha gently guided him back. But the restlessness in his steps grew stronger. He paced at night. He wandered farther during the day. He listened for something beyond her reach. Then, one morning during the dry season, the herd appeared. They moved like a tide of gray and wisdom, their massive shapes emerging through the dust. At their head was Nali, an elderly matriarch known for her calm authority. Surrounding her were young cows, protective bulls, and calves tucked among their legs. And among them was Casey, the young female with expressive eyes and quiet strength. The moment she spotted Kumo, she paused. Curiosity flickered across her features, followed by something warmer. Kumo stepped forward, torn between two worlds. He rumbled softly, answering a call older than memory. For 3 days, he hovered near the herd, but always returned to Asha before dusk, pacing with a conflict too big for words. Asha felt the shift with every heartbeat. She had faced predators, drought, and death. But this was the hardest challenge of all: letting go. On the 4th morning, Asha made the choice only a mother can make. She walked to a ridge and lay down beneath a thorn tree, giving Kumo the space he needed. She wouldn't stand in the way of the life he was meant to lead. Kumo hesitated, then walked toward the herd alone. The elephants tensed at first, but Nali approached him with slow, deliberate steps. She reached out her trunk in greeting. Kezi followed, brushing her trunk against his in gentle curiosity. Kumo answered with perfect elephant etiquette, as if some part of him had always known what to do. He was accepted, but he hadn't forgotten her. As dusk fell, Kumo turned away from the herd and climbed the ridge. Asha waited, still and calm. He knelt, lowering his massive head until his brow touched hers. Asha groomed him one last time, tracing the familiar ridges of his face with her tongue. It wasn't a goodbye filled with drama or pain. It was something softer, something sacred. A farewell born from love, not loss. Kumo touched her one final time, then turned toward the life awaiting him, and Asha watched until the darkness carried him away. 2 years passed after Kumo joined the herd, and the delta moved through its seasons with unhurried grace. Floodwaters rose and fell, grasslands shimmered with new life, and Asha, now an elderly lioness, moved through her days in quiet rhythm. She hunted enough to live, rested often, and returned again and again to the familiar places she once shared with Kumo. Though she lived alone, she carried no sadness. Her heart felt full, knowing the calf she once saved was now thriving in the world he was meant for. Then, one warm afternoon, a distant rumble drifted across the plains. It was deeper than she remembered, more powerful than the gentle calls of the calf she had raised. Birds exploded from the trees. Dust lifted in slow, swirling clouds. Asha rose to her feet, sensing something she couldn't quite name. Kumo appeared from behind a line of acacia trees, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. He was magnificent, bigger, broader, and more commanding than ever. His tusks gleamed like polished ivory, and the earth trembled with each step he took. But it was his eyes, soft and familiar, that told the truth. No time or distance had dimmed the bond they shared. And he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Kessie, the graceful young elephantess who had welcomed him into the herd. Her movements mirrored his naturally, as though they'd traveled side by side for years. Between them toddled a tiny calf, its ears far too large for its body, its trunk swinging clumsily with every unsure step. Asha froze, her breath catching. Kumo hadn't just returned. He had brought his family. Kumo stopped several yards away, lowering his head in a gesture of respect, so deep it made the air feel sacred. Asha stepped forward slowly, her old joints stiff but her spirit bright. She brushed her head against his massive leg, the way she had when he was small enough to fit beneath her chest. Kumo curled his trunk gently around her shoulders, lifting her with the same careful affection he had learned from her. Kessie watched them with calm awareness. She took a cautious step forward, nudging her calf closer. The baby elephant stretched out its trunk, tapping Asha's paw with unsteady curiosity. Asha lowered her head and licked the dust from its forehead, offering the same tender grooming she once gave Kumo. The moment felt impossibly natural. 3 generations standing beneath the wide African sky, united by a bond that no rule of nature could explain. They moved into the shade of the baobab tree, the same tree where Asha had discovered the dying calf all those years ago. The calf rested beside her, leaning its tiny body against her, as though instinctively recognizing the protector its father once loved. Kessie stood quietly, her trust surprising even to herself, and Kumo remained close, watching over his mother and his child with fierce, gentle pride. For nearly an hour, the strange family existed in perfect peace. The wind rustled through the leaves, casting moving shadows across their bodies. The earth breathed beneath them. Even the distant herds seemed to move more softly, as though honoring what was unfolding beneath the ancient tree. When the sun dipped low and the herd's distant calls drifted across the plains, Kessie shifted. It was time to go. Kumo lingered, lowering his head once more to Asha. She touched his trunk, a quiet blessing, and he rumbled softly in response. Then he turned back toward his family. Asha watched them disappear into the fading light, her heart full in a way few creatures ever experience. Their story wasn't ending. It was simply evolving, carried forward by the footsteps of a giant who never forgot the lioness who saved him. In the years that followed Kumo's return, the delta carried on with the timeless rhythm of nature. Floods rising, grasses shimmering, herds migrating, predators stalking. Yet in this vast and ancient wilderness, one story quietly reshaped everything scientists thought they knew about the emotional lives of animals. And at the center of that story was Asha. The old lioness lived out her final years in a peaceful stretch of land she and Kumo had once shared. Though age had softened her body and slowed her steps, her spirit remained unbroken. She moved through her territory like a guardian of memories, resting beneath the same trees she once sheltered Kumo under, drinking from the same pools she had led him to in their earliest days. Every year, without fail, Kumo returned. He came not as the uncertain calf she had once nudged through scorching heat, but as a fully grown bull elephant, strong, confident, and wise. Each visit began the same way, a deep rumble rolling across the plains, a familiar silhouette emerging from the shimmering air, and the slow, reverent bow of a giant honoring the one who raised him. And every time Asha rose to greet him, she nuzzled his face. He curled his trunk gently around her. And for a moment, the world seemed to fall silent in respect. Kessie accompanied him on many of these visits, their growing calf trailing behind. By the time Asha met the second and then the third of Kumo's children, she greeted each with the same quiet tenderness, grooming dust from their faces, resting beside them, allowing them to lean against her weathered shoulder. The calves, sensing safety without understanding why, adored her instantly. Wildlife researchers who recorded these reunions could hardly believe what they witnessed. Generations of elephants embracing a lioness as though she were part of their lineage. The footage spread across the world, igniting conversations about empathy, interspecies bonding, and the depth of animal emotion. Documentaries, academic papers, and conservation projects were inspired by what began under a single baobab tree. But for Asha and Kumo, none of it mattered. Their bond wasn't meant for cameras or headlines. It simply existed, real, enduring, and unchanged by time. As Asha aged into her final season, Kumo's visits became longer. He often lingered well after the herd had moved on, keeping watch over her from a respectful distance. He brought his youngest calf close, guiding it gently to meet her, as though passing down the story that defined his own life. And Asha, though her body weakened, stayed strong in spirit. She no longer hunted and instead lived on small prey and whatever she could manage. But she never lost her dignity, nor the steady, patient calm that made Kumo feel safe long before he understood the world. One quiet morning, after a night filled with soft breezes and distant elephant calls, Asha lay beneath the baobab tree, the very place where everything began. The rising sun painted her golden coat in warm light. Her breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. Kumo arrived shortly after dawn. He approached her with deliberate steps, sensing something in the stillness of the air. He lowered himself beside her, touching her shoulder gently with his trunk. She opened her eyes one last time, meeting his with the same warmth she had shown him since the moment she saved him. Then her breath eased out in one final gentle sigh. Kumo stayed with her for hours. He stood guard as the sun climbed high, rumbling softly in mourning. When he finally stepped away, he touched his forehead to hers, one last blessing, before following the distant calls of his herd. The delta continued on, but it was not the same. Asha's story lived in every elephant calf Kumo raised. It lived in every researcher who reevaluated what animals feel. It lived in the conservation programs shaped by her legacy. And most powerfully, it lived in the simple truth she had proven. Love is not bound by species. It does not follow instinct or rules. It is a force that rewrites nature itself. A lioness saved a dying elephant. An elephant never forgot the lioness who saved him, and together, they reminded the world that family can be born in the most unexpected places.